All right, welcome everyone to the August 2021 Boise ITSM Talks meeting. Pleased to have all of you with me today. I'm Jeff Jensen, and as we go forward, I'll do a quick round of introductory slides, and then we'll introduce our fantastic guest speaker today, David Cannon. So of course, first off, I always like to say thank you for taking time out of your day to attend our virtual meeting. Welcome to our first timers. We always encourage expansion and more awareness of the meetings we've been having within this group. It's great to be able to get things a little bit re-kick started here as we finish up the summer and start heading into second half in the fall part of the year, as business typically does pick up for a lot of us as we get out of the summer and start moving into this time of year. There's usually a little bit of a bubble within September, October, November timeframe for a lot of us in IT, I know. So welcome first timers, anyone from outside the Boise area, always welcome. Now that we've gone virtual, people from outside the area to attend, and especially I want to say thanks to David for joining us to deliver the presentation today. I always like to start off the meeting with a quick discussion around starting with why and what's our vision. We like to have these presentations deliver actionable information. The main thing I always like to do to help distinguish this group from many of the others that are out there is to have presentations and have content that allows you to have things that you can write down and take action around and have ideas that you can either implement or at least discuss in your organizations and then come back and share feedback. Absolutely, especially for today, we have extended time period and encourage all of you to participate as we get into our discussion and Q&A section. And why are we here? We're here to help inspire all of you to become better IT leaders and to continue to fill the voids that we see in a lot of organizations around ITSM and related frameworks. And again, as we expand our reach, now that we actually have some global attendees, that's even more fun to think about how we can help add value to our organizations. Today's presentation is Digital and IT Strategy, a year in review. And again, it's my pleasure to welcome David Cannon. He's Executive Vice President for Infinity 3. Many of you who were here last October know as we kicked off our virtual round of meetings for Boise ITSM, David was our first virtual speaker 10 months ago now, which is hard to believe it's been that long. And David gave a great introductory presentation around some of the contents and considerations around digital and IT strategy. And now he's here again, almost a year later, to talk about what we've seen happen since that publication was released and the different considerations around how we've seen changes in our organizations with obviously dealing with the pandemic and taking a look at the opportunities to go forward from where we started almost a year ago and where we are today. So please welcome David. I'll stop sharing my screen and give you presentation rights. Thank you for being here, and please go ahead.
Great. Just got to press all these things in the right sequence. So first, I muted myself. Thank you, Jeff, for inviting me, and good to see all of you. Some of you again, and some of you joined us from all over the place. So I'll just share the presentation and go straight into it. Should be able to see the main presentation screen. It says DITS 1 year later. Do you see it? Yep, good. So I'm going to go straight into this. This was a version of a presentation that I did for Service Management World, but I've adjusted it a little bit so that we can get a bit quicker through some of the theory. And I really want to focus on some of the questions that I have at the end of this deck. They're more aimed at really, I think, me finding out what's happening in your experience. It's one thing to have a look and do research, but it's another thing to speak to people who are actually being impacted this even as by all of this stuff even as we speak. So I'm very interested to hear feedback from you and what your experience is, and we'll get to that. So what has happened in the last year, and I'll start with the conclusion. The few things that we know in this past year, that we've learned in the past year, first of all, is that the rate of innovation and change is even more disruptive after the pandemic than it was before and during the pandemic. So we thought the pandemic was very disruptive, but what we're seeing now is as people respond to the pandemic and emerge from the pandemic, or whatever is going to happen next, they are more geared to change and to innovation than they were before, more prepared for it, more ready for it. So we're starting to see innovation and change really becoming even more disruptive. We'll cover a little bit more about that later, but what effectively has happened is that the pandemic did not just cause organizations to react so that they could keep in business, but we see a number of innovations that came about because of the pandemic have now changed the way in which those businesses work, and they will continue to work in the new way. For example, universities and colleges had to very quickly adjust the way they provided lectures. And in doing so, many of them changed their business models to be able to offer distance learning and remote learning and reach a broader number of students, or even add new types of courses and curricula into their programs. So that's organizations who are having their business models or their operating models changed. And that is fueling even further change. The next thing was that we realized that every part of the organization is touched by strategic decisions that relate to digital technology. Strategy used to be something that was defined at the very top levels of the organization and filtered its way down through some of the levels, usually didn't even reach the most junior levels of the organization. And kind of found its way through the organization in that way. But what we're finding now is that strategic decisions are affecting everybody, and they're affecting everybody almost immediately. You can decide whether or not you want to communicate your strategy. It is going to be a reality for people, and they're going to see the changes immediately, and they're going to be talking about the strategy immediately. It's not a delayed reaction, and it's not something that gets decided at one level and then communicated through other levels. It's something that hits the whole organization at the same time. The third thing that we've really come to appreciate is that ITSM programs that only look at the operational processes will become less and less valuable to the organizations. That's already started happening. For example, we see worked at a healthcare organization, did an assessment for them a couple of months ago. And one of the things that happened was that the operational ITSM folk, in many cases, were moved into the hospital and had to go and work in the hospital, not as IT people, but as hospital assistants in order to take the workload of some of those frontline workers. And that kind of changed the emphasis of ITSM in that organization. They had to rethink about the value of ITSM and what they were bringing to the organization. And they've had to step up to think a little bit more strategically within the organization to really demonstrate what the value of these ITSM processes are. The fourth thing that we've learned is that the frameworks, there's been a lot of hype about frameworks over the past, especially the past 6 months. And is ITIL the right way to go? Is DevOps the right way to go? Is Agile, whatever flavor of Agile you want, is Lean the best way to go? And the reality is that if an organization chooses one of those frameworks and sticks to it, their approach is going to be less valuable to their organization than an approach which focuses on what that business needs and then draws from multiple frameworks to meet those needs. And so the frameworks discussions, in fact, it's escalated in some cases that they become framework wars, are not as relevant as they seem to make out that they should be. They're important. Frameworks are really helpful, but they're not the be all and end all of everything. And we've really got to put them in their place. We've got to use them the way they were intended, and not try to dictate how people work using those frameworks. And then finally, the point that I will end with today, as I go through all the detail, is that our careers are changing. And this pandemic has marked a very clear change between back office functions and ITSM functions within the business itself. And again, I mentioned universities. I met with one of the university groups as the pandemic was, as the lockdowns were starting to happen last year, as we were preparing for this book. And a comment that they made at that time was, we are getting engaged in discussions with the faculties and the administration of the universities that we have never been involved in before. We're actually having business discussions. It's not about what technology do you want. It's about how do you actually run lectures in this environment? How do you do labs in this environment? These were business discussions that they were having. And a year later, what's very interesting to note is that some of those managers stayed in that role, continued to be part of those meetings, continued to have those discussions. Others of those managers went back to their previous roles and continued to do their technology-centric type of work, developing solutions, supporting those solutions, and so on in the back office. And so it's clearly there's a greater divergence happening in our careers. So that's the whole summary. That's what I'm going to be covering today. But let's just talk about this in the context of DITS, and of course that stands for digital and IT strategy. It's not referring to me, although it very well could. But I'm going to look at some of the favorites, some of the, just a couple of the concepts in DITS that people have said they really enjoy. Those that I've heard, most people say they enjoy. I'm not going to cover all those pieces that people say they didn't enjoy. That we're not going to cover that. Then I'm going to look at what we learned during the pandemic. I'm going to look at some of the distractors that we have to deal with now that we're in whatever stage we are emerging from the pandemic, going through the next stage. And then I'm going to ask where organizations are going to go next. So what are the favorites? This one is a particular favorite. I think this one has resonated with most people that I've spoken with as we go through the book, and that is, it explains why organizations have had to change the way in which they work over the past 10 to 15 years. If you take 10 years ago, remember ITIL version 3 was published just 10 years ago, and ITIL version 3 was written in a very IT-centric kind of environment where IT was the service provider, the business units were the customers, and that was how we managed IT. Well, of course, along comes the cloud, and suddenly everybody's a service provider, and IT is just one of many service providers in the organization, and it changed. Well, the reason that changed so much is because the environment in which we work has become volatile and rapidly changing. So if you had to look, this is just an example, if you have to look at the left side of the diagram, you'll see these, this long arrow, this long cycle over here. This is an annual review cycle for strategy. Great. It's what most organizations did. They would have an annual review cycle. The strategy itself may be for 5 years, but it was reviewed every year. And then suddenly we start seeing, rate of innovation kicking in. We start seeing new technologies being introduced that actually disrupt our business, so that within that year, we suddenly find that certain things that we're doing are no longer valid or no longer providing the return that we anticipate, and we have to change. New technology has come in and we have to adjust because of that. And so your planning cycle starts shrinking. Now, right in the middle here is probably, I guess, when you're in the middle of a pandemic, these blue circles in the middle, your planning cycles shrink, your strategy planning cycles shrink from annual cycles down to, I think in some cases, less than a month, right? What are we going to do to stay in business? That strategy is only going to be valid for the next month while we're learning what we have to do. And then suddenly you have to keep tuning it, changing it. How do we keep up with the changes that are happening? What's everybody else doing? Can we also do that? And so your strategy cycles get very, very short. Now, of course, that's an extreme. And we hope we're not in these kind of situations very often, and certainly not for too long. Before long, I anticipate things will stabilize a little bit, not totally, because innovation is still rampant, but the strategy cycles will grow to be a little bit longer. What happens in these strategy cycles is very interesting. the initiatives that come out of them are very short, and there are a lot of them. What that implies is that because we have to react very quickly to things that are happening in our environment or even inside our organization, we have to be very agile. And that's agile with a small a. We just have to be able to respond and react really, really quickly and get ahead of things very, very quickly. So to do that, lots of small initiatives, incremental developments over time. But you don't want to have a very long initiative, because the longer it is, the more likely it is to fail. And the less likely you are going to be able to recover from that failure. So very short, frequent, incremental changes to the organization. So it's not because somebody came along with this idea that Agile was fantastic that we adopted it. Agile became fantastic because of the kind of industry that we were in, right? And so it's that way around. Same thing with ITIL. ITIL wasn't the greatest thing because it told people what to do. ITIL was good because it looked at what other people were doing that worked. So these kind of frameworks always follow what's going on in the industry. And it's up to us as organizations to take that in, evaluate it, and figure out where things are going to go next. Anyway, I'll come back to that point a little bit later on, but this kind of explains where we are. And it also says that there's, in this kind of environment, you want as much help as you can get. You don't just say, oh, well, we suddenly moved from waterfall to, to incremental change, rapid change projects. So therefore, we're going to throw everything away and just go to an agile-based approach. No, some parts are still going to be, still going to need that kind of waterfall approach. Some parts are going to need an agile approach. How do you, in your organization, develop a culture that can deal with both? Those are some of the challenges that we have to deal with. Now, and another reason this is, I don't know that too many people find this a favorite. I think it's one of my favorites because it explains so much of what's going on. So we've got the waterfall on the left-hand side, right? Plan, build, and run. And that's how we always used to do it. And to be honest, if you are in a very stable industry using very stable technology, there's no need to do anything any other way, because that's pretty much a good way to do it. You got time for testing, you got time for building, you got time for requirements analysis. It's great, right? But we're not in that position. We're in a position where everything is changing every 2-3 months. And the reason for that is because people are innovating. And the innovation is happening not only from vendors, but it's happening amongst our users and amongst our customers. And because of that, we're going to have to change very quickly. Now, interesting thing about innovation, and I didn't appreciate this at first, but we always think of innovation as fueling new growth. The interesting thing about innovation, though, is that at the same time as it's fueling growth, it's also fueling commoditization. Because the more you innovate, the faster people have to learn how to keep that innovation stable. So especially if you're using it to deliver business services, people expect that they love the innovation side and it's a novelty, but the novelty is only good for 2 or 3 weeks. And then it's got to work consistently every single time. So you have to teach people how to manage it consistently every single time that, they become good operators. Well, the more people you teach on how to do this, the more people begin to do it. The more people do it, the more everybody starts doing it. And the more everybody starts doing it, the more you see companies springing up that specialize in delivering that. What used to be a hugely innovative competitive edge is now being delivered as a commoditized service. So think, for example, of ERP systems. 20 years ago, ERP systems were the thing that would differentiate a manufacturing organization and a distribution organization. It was the thing that allowed some of the larger manufacturers to get ahead of everybody else. Today, you can get ERP online on a per user license. It is, and pay $10 a month for it. It's no longer something that is going to give you a competitive edge. It's more like something that you have to have, otherwise you're going to lose a competitive edge. So that's what's happening with innovation. And so the whole thing is that innovations are moving very, very quickly through the cycle. And here's an interesting thing: is that there's a lot of things that come out of this picture, but one of the interesting things that comes out of this is think about all of your innovative teams within your organization. So think of those teams who are doing, who are embedded in the business, who are developing products. How long is it before the work that they're doing today is going to end up being a commodity that is going to be managed out of your back office or by a cloud service provider? Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to manage that migration from something that is cutting edge to something that is legacy in under a year? That's something we have to start dealing with. We've never had to think about that before. And so just think of the developers who are working on this cutting edge stuff. They're so excited about it. They're so enthusiastic and so eager, and there's so much business value associated with it. And before very long, they're starting to have another discussion. Well, okay, I know that last year we spoke about how much money we would give you so that you could keep developing this thing. This year, we want you to show us how much money you can cut, because, we need to reprioritize our investment. And suddenly people are thrown, where did that come from? I used to be one of the stars. I used to be one of the people that you invested in. Now I'm one of the people who has to cut budget. Where does that come from? Right? So we got to be able to manage that transition. And it's not a transition really, it's a cycle. A lot more effectively. And we've got to help people to understand, that things are not always going to be at that cutting edge, that things that we as a business depend on are also a little bit further back down the line, that are not always in the front end of innovation, and that they're all important, all valuable, and that it's all cyclical. That entire management style is going to change. And really that comes out of what's on the right-hand side of this diagram, which is we now have, instead of a plan, build, run, we have a planning cycle, which sits on top of this whole thing. And that includes the strategy. It's not just your project plans. It's also the strategic plan of the organization that feeds the objectives into and the initiatives into the build run cycle. That build run cycle is tightly integrated. And of course, we've built the measure and learn in. It's kind of Deming-like, but even further. So it incorporates a number of the modern working methods that we see in the industry. And all of this tightly integrated build run cycle runs on a commoditized support layer. Some of that layer will be sitting in your basement or your back office. Some of that layer, a lot of that layer will be in the cloud. So what does that mean? If you have a closer look at this is not in the diagram, but this is something that I kind of looked at after the diagram, which is there has to be that linkage between plan, build, and learn and plan. That's very often missing in organizations, right? We assume that once the project is finished, it's done. Therefore, we've done the job. But no, actually, every time you build something, every time you do something, it may have impacted your overall strategy. And therefore, you have to keep going back. What was the impact of the strategy on the strategy? Because the strategy is trying to balance what's happening outside the organization with what's happening inside the organization. So it's continuously looking for feedback from both sides, because both of the environments are changing rapidly. And then down at the bottom is vendor management, both, and I guess you could call it internal and external. I put SLA there, but that's SLAs and contracts. Vendor management becomes a key capability because of this rapid outsourcing of commoditized components or putting them in a basement and managing them there. It is really, really important that those contracts and SLAs, whatever terminology you want to use, are tightly linked into the objectives of the build run cycle, which are tightly linked into the objectives of the organization as a whole. And by the way, please stop me if you need to. If you have questions or comments or just want a break. Here's another one which is becoming very, very important, which is this view of the portfolio. Now, generally, when you speak about portfolio, depending on which framework you're talking about, it could mean an application portfolio, it could mean a project portfolio, it could mean a service portfolio, it could mean a customer portfolio. But as an enterprise, we're starting to place a lot more focus on the end-to-end value chain. In other words, how do we create value with our customers? And what do we need in order for us to create that value? So the value to the organization on the right defines what it is we want to achieve. That tells us who our customers are and what we need to deliver to them. Of course, it's cyclical, right? So we learn from our customers, and that may change what our value is as an organization, but it's cyclical. The customers tell us what our products and services should be. Products and services tell us what kind of development work we need to do, as well as what kind of existing resources we should leverage for that. And all of that together tells us where's the money coming from. Notice this is nowhere in here does it talk about IT. We're talking here about multifunctional teams, because no IT service on its own is used to drive revenue for the business. There are a number of other things that have to be included with it, even if it is an externally facing customer service, externally revenue producing service, such as an order processing system on the web. It still depends on links into that back office supply chain, inventory control, et cetera, et cetera. So even if we view IT as a service that is generating revenue, there are still a number of other parts that work with that. And we have to, if we really want to understand the value of IT, we really have to combine it with the other components and assess what all of those components do together. And this is becoming one of the, let me put it this way, this is probably one of the most basic aspects of service management. One of the most basic principles is that if you want to deliver value, you have to be able to identify your services and calculate how you deliver those services. It's one of the fundamental building blocks of service management, and yet it is one that organizations are probably struggling with more than any other. CMDBs are not working well enough for people to be able to do this. And data is just all over the organization. And how do you get it all together? And how do you map everything so that you can make these calculations, so that you can figure out what your portfolio looks like, not only for IT, but for the whole organization? And this becomes really, really important, because the business of the organization is fast moving to be a technology-enabled business. So it's not just a technology-supported business. The technology is now being embedded in the business service itself. And when that starts to happen, you have to be able to combine a portfolio so you have to have a portfolio which combines both the technology components as well as all of the other components that are used in delivering that service. So this is something that people are really coming to grips with now. It's a struggle for many organizations, but I think we're going to see a lot of development and growth in this area in the coming couple of years. Okay, what did we learn from the pandemic? I'm going to accelerate a little bit here, because just a summary of some of the things that we've observed. The first one is we didn't know as much as we thought we did. It's only when a disaster hits us that we suddenly realize how much we take for granted. How all of those policies that we defined for people who are working in offices now suddenly stop them from working when they're working remotely. Things we thought were most important really weren't. I use an example. I called a service provider, and I won't go into names, details of mine. And I said, I need to add a service. And they said, I'd love to be able to help you, but we're all working from home, and we're not allowed to access the systems that we need unless we're physically located in one of our offices. Well, so you can't do business. So your policies in that situation become an obstruction to your business, not an enabler. How do you overcome that? And what problem were they trying to solve? Yeah. So governance is critical, but different than we thought, and leadership is critical, different than we thought. Not totally. So governance critical. I think a lot of people view governance as compliance or as control. And what we learned during the pandemic is that governance is actually something that is enabling. It's about how do you get the right people to make the right decisions for the situation that they're in? How do you give them the tools that they need? And by the way, leadership is exactly the same. It's how do we create a working space so that people can get the job done that they need to get done? And governance is about how do we get them to make the decisions they need to make? And how do we coordinate all of these different initiatives going on so that we don't have people, taking the organization off track and off strategy? I think IT was seen in a new light. I've already given an example of that, but it remains to be seen how many IT leaders stay within that business-facing role and how many revert back into a back office role. An interesting thing that we observed is that the use of digital technology accelerated. Just look at Zoom, video conferencing capabilities, for example. So the use of the technology accelerated dramatically. But to do that, organizations slowed down their digital strategy. So all of those strategic uses and business cases that were built on new and emerging technology were kind of put on hold while we got people to be able to do their day job using different technologies. Interesting, and I'm going to ask the question a bit later, okay, now that we've done that, now that we've all standardized on video conferencing as part of our, and remote working as part of our operation as an organization, will that continue? Has the reaction to the pandemic now enabled us to create a business strategy which grows our organization in new ways? The other thing, innovation needs to happen everywhere. And again, a question I'm going to ask at the end of this is, to what extent has innovative thinking started becoming more prevalent in the organization? Now, we know not everybody is an innovator, not everybody should be. There are some people who just need to get the job done the way it was defined and who really enjoy doing that and should be encouraged to keep doing that. But a lot of people in the pandemic had to sit down and say, well, I got to make this thing work. I've got a customer on the line. I can't get access to the system because I'm not in my office. How do I give them the service? People became very innovative in the way they thought. Is that going to stick? Is that still going to be a reality of the organization? Home life is a lot more difficult than we thought. And, personally, I didn't find it too bad. My kids graduated fine. And then I was speaking to someone who had kids in elementary school who said, this is tough. We are working, they're a couple in this case, are working, 14, 15-hour days. And it's pure work because we're taking in shifts to look after the kids. We're doing our work, but we're also doing all of the work to school and take care of the kids. And it is really, really tough. It's not, suddenly it wasn't about work-life balance. Work and life were in the same thing. We're in the same room. How do you deal with that? It became a lot more difficult than we thought. But over all of that, the human spirit triumphs over adversity. And of course, when we do triumph over adversity, we break stuff. And a lot of stuff was broken, and probably in a good way, so that we could get things done. But sorry, just getting some tea over here so that I can keep my throat working. So the question is, everything that we've learned as we've triumphed, as we've triumphed through adversity, everything that we've broken, do we keep it broken and move on from there? Or do we try and piece the pieces back together to what they looked like before the pandemic? And I think that's a struggle that many organizations are going through. So is there value in having broken some things, and do they work better now? Or should we go back to where they were before? Two layers of ITSM emerged, and I referenced this briefly before. So we had the sort of business as usual ITSM. This is the break fix on the help desk or service desk. You have key projects that are continuing to move forward. But what you see is that a number of people were taken out of ITSM roles and put into business roles so that we could deal with that. For example, in hospitals, put into business roles so that we could deal with that situation. So there they are, that yellow line there. They're taken away from ITSM. They go in. You'll notice the business as usual dips a little bit. Proactive problem management project canceled. All we need to be able to do right now is react. Those people go out and they're ferrying patients around and so on. And so, the role of proactive ITSM that's sort of dipped. And then over time, as things eased up, you start seeing the yellow line coming back into business as usual. And business as usual is now starting to reinstate some of those more proactive, some of those more strategic ITSM projects. So that's where we are right now. What are the distractors during this time? What are they? These are things that we get distracted by, obviously. We need to be able to deal with. The one is still a heavy focus on the back office. We had to let some stuff kind of lie for a year because we didn't have the funds and resources to be able to deal with them. And so now we have to come back. We have to focus on that. But in doing that, we cannot afford to lose focus on the front office, on the business side of things. So some of the things we got to take care of. One is, let's build beyond incident, problem, and change management. There is so much more to managing IT than that. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Request catalogs are the norm right now. They're not very helpful. And the reason for that in many organizations is that request catalogs are completed or created by teams who are trying to tell other teams how they would like them to engage with them. They're not focused on providing end-to-end services. And so, it's just basically, you can have a request catalog with 1,000 requests in it. Each one may be a component of a bigger request chain, like an onboarding request. But there is a order laptop, configure laptop, licensing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And each of those is a separate request. Well, how do you join them all together? So I think a lot of organizations are now realizing that they need to go back and start looking at this from a front office perspective and start putting these fragmented requests into more of a chain. 88%, this comes from Gartner, 88% of CMDB projects fail or only partially succeed. We've got to figure out a way to fix that. And we got to stop relying on the discovery tools to populate our CMDBs. They do it just fine, but they give us way more information than we need, one, and they don't tell us how it all fits together. Only people can do that. So how do we get that done? The rate of technology change forces continuous learning of the basics. This is an interesting one. I was around, as many of you were, when the first cloud solutions were announced. And one of the most exciting things about cloud is that you didn't have to do service management anymore, according to the cloud experts, right? Service management is taken care of in the cloud. You don't have to do it anymore. Yeah, right. We have more service management now using cloud services than we ever had before. So, don't believe the hype that somebody tells you. If you take this new technology on board, don't worry about solving those basics. It does it for you. Don't worry about mapping the services. This thing maps all the services for you. There is no way a tool can map services for you on its own, because the knowledge on how services are mapped is sitting in people's heads. And until we can replicate that, in fact, not even artificial intelligence can do it yet. Until we can replicate that, there is no tool that can do this. And so people have to get involved. You have to learn the basics, and you have to go through putting them in place with the technology that exists. Cannot keep waiting for the next technology to come in that promises it's going to do it for you, and it never does. So use of the cloud is extensive, but the maturity of managing the cloud is not. We're still in the beginning. Now, I don't think I said this in the intro, but I've just finished editing the latest ITIL book, which is due out in September this year, about acquiring and using cloud services. Acquiring, managing, and using cloud services. And one of the things we learned as we were writing that book, and as I was editing it, because I'm not the expert, but one of the things we learned is that the way of managing cloud, the methods that are used to manage clouds are so diverse and all over the place. There is very little maturity in managing cloud services across the industry. Of course, we have some organizations that are more mature than others, but as a whole, it's a free-for-all out there. And we're going to have to get better about doing that, especially because we depend on cloud. And yes, so the missing ABCs, we're going to have to spend some time really focusing on those. Don't get distracted by organizations that tell you you don't have to worry about ABCs, the tools do them for you. Yeah, I think we've been through this. So here are some of the ABCs that we need to focus on. Just a list there. They're simple things. They're basic things that we thought we already had under control. But if you really look at it, they're not well managed within our organizations. Again, generalizing here, fully anticipate that some of you on this call, don't have these problems. That's fine. But a lot of organizations do. Look at that last one, for example, one of my favorites, SLAs. The modern use of the word SLA, it doesn't refer to an agreement. It refers to a metric in an incident ticket. And it basically says, here's how long you've got to resolve the incident. Did you or didn't you? And that's your SLA. Where did the SLA go from, which told us what the service is used for? What would happen if it failed? What the impact on the business would be? What kinds of failures we could anticipate? What the customers needed to be able to do to keep that service functional? Where's their responsibility? All of that is gone, and we've reduced all of that richness down to one field in an incident record. I'm exaggerating, I know, and I apologize for that, but just to make the point, I think sometimes we've taken the richness of the ABCs and just to get them done quickly, we've kind of put them in there and we've lost something. So time to maybe revisit some of those. Another thing that's happened is that we've started to see, and this was before the pandemic, it's not just about the pandemic, this happened before the pandemic, but it's become strengthened, is that what we used to call ITSM, which was really another word for managing technology, has now become 4 different specializations. There are probably a few more, but the 4 big ones right now is ITSM, which strangely refers only to incident, problem, service desk, and request catalogs, maybe a bit of knowledge management and change management. Software asset management, which is all about monitoring consumption and managing entitlements like licenses. IT operations management, which is about keeping servers running smoothly or cloud services performing smoothly. IT financial management is about providing cost transparency. And that's fine. It's fine to have specializations, but the problem has been that these have now become divorced and they don't speak to each other. So financial management is now being managed by a technology business office, which is totally separate from the service management office, which manages IT service management and doesn't deal with capacity management, which is somehow dealt with by the technology or network operations center, and they never speak to each other. That doesn't make any sense at all. That's not ITSM at all. That was never the intention of ITSM, but this is what's happened. I suspect it has to do with some of the tooling that's out there and the fact that tools have become very specialized. And if you look at them, the tools have done 2 things. They've taken those pieces of ITSM that can be automated in one of 2 ways. 1, workflow and ticket. If I can create a workflow and put a ticket on it, I got a tool for it. That's great. Don't worry me about anything else. Capacity forecasting, yeah, no. You need some specialized tool for that. That doesn't have a workflow and a ticket associated with it. We can't deal with that in the tool, right? And the second thing is reporting and status tracking, financial management, for example. So unless we can suck data into a database and then report on it, it's not really valuable. Well, what about 80% of what we as IT people do, which is simply about keeping our infrastructure and our applications and our networks functioning optimally, that never take a workflow, that never take a ticket, and do not rely on out-of-date reporting. So I think what's happening is that, yes, I fully agree we need these specialized skills, but we've kind of spent so much focus on developing these skills that we've let some of the really important things, I wouldn't say we've forgotten them, but they've kind of faded into the background a little bit. And I'll give you proof of why this is an issue. I was reading in CIO magazine, I think it was about 3 months ago. There was an article about, as they usually do, the top 10 issues with migrating to the cloud. First 2 issues were the ones you'd expect to see there. Lack of understanding of what was being migrated, lack of funding and management commitment. Okay, cool. That you can apply those to any project. But the third one was really interesting. The third one was unpredictability of workloads. And what that means is, because we put a workload into the cloud and then people start using it, you pay per use. And if you don't know how they're going to be using it, you can actually end up spending 2 or 3 times more than what's in your budget. Well, that's a real problem. And why did we have this problem in the first place? Because in service management, there is this thing called workload analysis and workload forecasting, which is basically what you do is you look at a service, you have a look at all of the components that service uses, so you map them. Then you look at the users and you ask the users, how much are you going to be using this service? Do you have any marketing campaigns coming up? Do you have any increases in workload that you're expecting? And you can then model these workloads based on all that information and forecast what your utilization is going to be. Apparently, that has been reduced to, well, we've got a server. It was used at 50% last year. It's used at 60% this year. Therefore, it's going to be used 70% next year and 80% the year after that. And that's our cloud forecast mechanism. It doesn't work. And people are starting to learn this. And so that was the third item on the list of problems we have with migrating to cloud. And what it boils down to is we just took our eye off the ball of the big picture of service management. We focused on some of these smaller components. I'm not saying it's wrong to specialize, but we can't take our ball off some of the bigger picture items as well. So there you go. There's I've already discussed this. Just one other thing is they're not designed to support value streams. The incident records that we have right now, you look at them, request catalogs, as I mentioned, they're fragmented. They're not designed to support value streams. They're designed to support processes. And that's cool. It's good to have a good functioning incident management process. But if you can't map your incident management process back to the value stream that it's supporting, that becomes a problem. How do you prioritize incidents? How do you prioritize situations where the same resource is having to deal with an incident, a change, and a routine activity at the same time? Which one is most important? If you don't have the value stream information, you can't make those decisions. So, ITIL has one ITSM, has multiple integrated practices. I'm going to skip right past this. Final bit on this section is the other frameworks, and I mentioned this already. I want to really stress all the frameworks have value. Not a single framework out there that has no value, but none provide a solution, not a single one of them. And for anybody to take a framework and say, we're going to standardize on one single framework, you're going to lose value. And you lose even more value when you hear messages like, our framework is better and that other framework sucks. Some of it may suck, absolutely. You don't have to follow that part, but some of it probably has some value to you. Which is that part? Use that part. And so we're starting to see a number of organizations coming forward with a hybrid. We're going to use that little bit from Agile. We've got that from Scrum. We've got this from ITIL. We've got that, and they pull it all together, and they have something unique to their organization, but it really works, and it works well. And I think that's what we're trying to promote here. 20 years ago, it was ITIL, right, in operations. Today, it's not just ITIL. We have to coexist with multiple frameworks. So where do organizations go next? What does that mean for us? So and I've gone on way longer than I should have. I'm sorry, Jeff, and sorry everybody on the call. But just to tell you a story about 5 CIOs, it's a very brief story. I attended an event probably about 2 months ago. It was a face-to-face event here in Dallas, and they had a panel discussion. 5 CIOs were on this panel discussion, and the question was asked, tell us about your digital strategy as it relates to the people in your organization. 4 of the CIOs told pretty much the same story. Our biggest challenge is getting our people the data they need to do their jobs. So our digital strategy is about data. It's about finding out where the data is, staging it, and communicating it to them where and when they need it. That's our digital strategy. The 5th CIO, this was really interesting, 5th CIO stood up and said, well, here's my strategy. We're an ice manufacturing company. I worry about one thing and one thing only. Is there enough ice in the freezers when the customers need it? To do that, I have to monitor the level of ice in every freezer. I have to monitor where my trucks are, and I have to monitor what is being manufactured at what quantity and where, so I can get the ice from the factory to the freezer in time before it runs out, so the customers can continue getting it. And so my digital strategy is based on monitoring Internet of Things and comparing the data that I'm getting back with my production systems and my distribution systems. There's my digital strategy. Very, very different. And I think the modern organization, the post-pandemic organization, if we can even start talking in those terms, is more like the 5th CIO than it's going to be about the other 4 CIOs. It's about how do we embed that technology within our business to create greater value for our customers. So we need to embrace modern working methods. We need to focus on more than just the value stream itself, but we need to know what happens after the value stream, and we need to know what happens before the value stream. So 1 plus value stream plus 1. And we have to make sure that we link the back office and the front office of our IT shops. What does it mean for your career? And basically our careers are headed in 1 of 3 places. And I'm talking about ITSM professionals here. We're either going to end up in the business, in business meetings, part of multifunction teams, supporting, building, delivering products, or we're going to end up in the back office where we're supporting those commoditized systems, servers, network, et cetera, or we're going to end up in the cloud, managing cloud services. They're all valuable career paths, and all of them will be needed, and all of them will be highly paid, no doubt. The question is, where do you want to be? If you want to stay in the business, these are the things you have to do. You have to learn the business. And I'm anticipating that within another 10 years, the situation will have changed significantly. So 10 years ago, if you were in IT, you could get a job in any organization doing IT. That was fine. I think in 10 years from now, if you're in IT in a bank, you will only ever be able to work in a financial institution as an IT person, because you're so closely bound to the business, because you have to understand how the business works. If you're in IT in a manufacturing organization, you will only ever work in a manufacturing organization. You will become a manufacturing business professional with an IT specialization. You got to learn to think strategically. Even if you're not defining a strategy, you still have to learn to think strategically. We have to learn to spend time with other business leaders in their environment. It basically means getting out from behind the desk and walking the floor. Learn how they make decisions so that you can contribute to them, and know how to manage service providers. Those are going to be the key skills moving forward. If you want to stay focused on operational ITSM, please understand, I'm not trying to denigrate anybody here, but if you're working on a help desk that does break fix, you are a back office function. Okay, the reason for that is because what you're doing is you're working with systems and devices that are back office. You're not providing business support. Now, if you're a service desk that lives within the space of the end user and answers questions like, hey, I bought a new iPad today and I need to get it to help me do X, Y, and Z, then you're in the front office. But if all you're doing is break, fix, incident, and problem management, you're a back office function, and the service desk will start moving into the back office if that's all it does. So even those customer-facing functions within ITSM, unless they're involved in the business itself, are going to start moving more and more into the back office. And pretty much the way we started in IT operations. That's pretty much how it's going to be in the future. Again, not a bad career. That's where I came from. I loved it. And certainly I think it's a good career, but it's not the same as the business-focused ITSM. If you decide to pursue a technology specialization, and this applies to developers as well as operations, then you'll stay in a technical leadership position in the organization, not a hierarchical leadership, but a technical leadership position, but only for as long as that technology continues to provide competitive advantage for your organization. When it stops providing competitive advantage, it becomes legacy and it moves into the back office. So the call to action there is decide where you want to go, learn the business, don't follow the framework, but use multiple frameworks. And remember that a strategy never works unless the basics are there. So make sure that you are that everyone in the IT organization is clear about where they fit in the value chain. And what that requires is us to become business-minded IT leaders. Okay, sorry, I took much longer than I anticipated there. I got too excited. Apologies for that. So there's me and my details if you need to get a hold of me. And now we move into discussion.
Yeah, so real quick, David, I know that we've got this meeting scheduled for an hour and a half, but in case anybody does need to drop here at the top of the hour, I'd like you to either chat in any questions or comments before you have to leave. And if you can stay for the extra 30 minutes of Q&A, we'd certainly love to have you stay. So I just want to catch up on anybody that does have a hard stop and maybe has to jump off early. If you have to do that, definitely want to give you a chance to ask David a question. Is anybody out there that has to run right away and would like to have a question answered? Hi, Tim. Yes, I see your chat. And yes, I will be recording this and posting it out on my YouTube and posting it out on LinkedIn. And I'll make sure you get that. You bet. Any question or anything else, Tim, that you wanted to ask before you have to jump off? Feel free to come off mute too if you'd like. Okay, yep, see a couple folks had to leave. Ricardo, Jake, yep. You guys need to run, no problem. Appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks, David. Thanks, Jeff. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jacob.
Yep, thanks for being here. Okay, so go ahead, David, and I'll give you the floor back. And if you would like to seed some questions or maybe ask some questions of the audience, we can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, these are my areas of curiosity right now. We don't have to discuss them in any particular sequence. I should have actually put them up one by one, but basically 4 questions. What was the biggest disruption in the pandemic? And how did that change your organization? Are you keeping those changes? Or are they valuable to you moving forward, or are you going to have to revert back? As your business changed and the operating models changed, what about innovation? Have you become more innovative as an organization? And then finally, when you started having those business discussions with business leaders, have you been able to maintain that? If so, how? So those are the 4 questions that I wanted to pose, and I'm going to keep quiet now and let people whatever you would like to answer in whatever sequence.
David, this is Joni. I think the biggest change to the organization that I'm currently working with in the banking world is the allowance of or more freedom for people to work from home. Basically opened that door from the banking industry wide open. And now they've really needed to and had to step up with more compliance, more security around all of that. And I imagine Michael probably is experiencing that in the healthcare industry as well. So that's been something very interesting. And then they started allowing full-time people and hiring with the point that you don't have to have people that come on site now. You can actually hire remote workers that can actually fulfill the vacancies that you have. So it's been interesting to see that change a little bit.
Is that going to stay that way?
Yes.
Yeah, to mirror your thoughts, Joni, I think the biggest disruption that we've seen, and I'm at Blue Cross of Idaho, so the healthcare insurance space, but yeah, I mean, it's really on the human capital side, and I think some of the technology challenges that we experienced early on, and Michael, you may laugh a little bit, but for me, more of a consumer than a provider standpoint, it was really pretty seamless, and I think we had enough facility and enough technology to support the transition to home that it was relatively seamless. But yeah, I mean, it will leave a remarkable path forward on the way that we think, the way that we recruit, the way that we hire, the geographical boundaries. And I think that's where we've seen the most disruption. I suspect that there's going to be a little bit of a trend to pull it back into, having offices. We've got a beautiful facility, and I know our executive leadership really wants to maintain that footprint of in-person. But honestly, to compete and to get good employees, we have to remain flexible. So that's definitely the biggest disruption that I think that we've seen.
So a related question, because right now the ability to retain those resources is the competitive advantage, right? So I'm spending a lot of money on all of the technology and security required to make that happen. Do you think at a point that these remote resources are going to provide you as an organization with a competitive advantage that other people don't have? Is there a way to turn this into something that is unique to your organization?
That's an interesting question, David. I'm not sure. I agree with John, though, on the human capital management stuff. I think if you don't do it, you're in peril of losing good people that have mobility and talent. They'll just go elsewhere because it's a competitive job market, especially in the IT space. But I don't know if it'll give you like an advantage to be remote, other than it won't disadvantage you to not be, if I'm saying that correctly, but
right.
Yeah,
I don't know that it would give you a competitive advantage. I think it's going to maybe give you a wider, it will definitely give you that wider area to search for resources that have the wider skill set that you're looking for, the more up to date skill sets that you're looking for, as opposed to being cordoned off to the local areas or the valleys that we live in. So.
Mm-hmm.
So the competitive advantage here comes from providing a superior remote working experience to your employees. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And just to tack on that thought from what I that makes me feel like just even the whole aspect of customer and especially user experience that we're starting to see. I think the employee experience aspect of that you're starting to see get focused on more and more too. And I think that in and of itself is going to be a big factor just from a retention standpoint, because it's much easier, as we always hear this, to keep existing employees than it is to find new employees. Maybe that's a little bit easier now if we were able to broaden our reach or have access to people that aren't maybe just in a specific geography. But I think that dynamic of employee experience and what are the metrics that go around measuring if you're successful with that is going to become more and more of an important piece going forward.
Yeah. And then something for our, Jeff made me think of this. Our consumers or our members that we serve, telehealth became a big deal. So kind of to David's point about remote being a strategic advantage. With respect to telehealth, that used to be something, I don't know the exact number, but it was it was very low. It was like 30% or less total claims or whatever. And we wanted to encourage providers to get on and start providing more telehealth visits, and it jumped up to somewhere north of 50%. I want to say 64%, but I don't remember the last numbers we were given. But anyway, that was I guess an advantage, and something that the company didn't realize was, it's a lower cost option. We used to not pay as providers as much for those types of visits, but what we discovered through the pandemic is that that's a necessity, and we have to be able to do it. And then can we turn that into an advantage? And so kind of promote that to providers like, hey, do telehealth, we can help you, and we'll give you more money for doing that or whatever, and then you can serve more people, that sort of thing. So that was, I guess, one. There's some other ones, but I'm not really familiar with the inner workings of the business and our offerings. So, but just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and maybe an ancillary thing too that I've just noticed, and it's certainly more anecdotal than anything, but the feedback loops seem to be growing shorter, right? With some of the on-site face-to-face work, right? Trying to organize people into a meeting, finding an open conference room, right? The delay on getting from a question or situation to solution and getting the right people in the room, was limited by some of our physical geography. And, now notice that people have closer proximity to their keyboards for more hours of the day, utilizing tools like, MS Teams and I'm sure other organizations with Slack, and having more of a chat room or a breakout room or a thread-based conversation. I've really seen our feedback loops shorten, right? So you can knock out a quick email or send a chat message to get answer, resolution, clarification, versus the propensity to set up a face-to-face meeting 3 days out.
Have any of these changes made the organization stop and think that you could be offering new or different services? I guess the telehealth one is one example.
You have a lot more from the banking industry. You have a lot more mobile and online features. Absolutely, it's bringing more to people's fingertips, so that they don't have to have that human interaction when they're doing all of their banking. They have the ability to do it from their phone or from a computer. So
Joni, which bank are you with? Is it a national bank or a local?
It's a local credit union.
Local credit union, okay.
Yeah, in the Northwest.
Has this made you think of extending your reach to other states, other markets?
I know that they have been looking at the other markets, and that's just part of it is just the business as a whole, looking to different markets and different businesses. I'm not privy to a lot of the information that they are looking at or the markets that they're inquiring into, but yeah, I think it's increased and broadened their scope.
Liz, Dennis, Jefferson, any of you feel free to come off mute or ask anything or contribute to the discussion. Any of you have anything you want to add? I'll encourage everybody to join in here if you would like.
And Mark as well, if he's still awake.
Yeah, Mark came
Mark
back.
Wiebeck is in London at the moment. He lives there. One of my partners from Synexios. So he just came off mute. He's still awake. There he is.
I'm still here. It's only 8:10. I just find it fascinating what you were saying earlier, David, about that you mentioned the use of digital has accelerated, but strategy has slowed. And if you look online, there's a lot of articles and comment about the pandemic accelerating digital transformation. And I suppose at some level there's tactical digital activities will become strategic for many businesses. But could you maybe expand a bit on your statement about digital strategy slowing, which is counter to a lot of the comments online?
Well, so what's happened is suddenly remote working became the point of our digital strategy, but the digital strategy was literally shrunk to a month, because we had to get these workers working, right? And so we had to figure out a way to do it, and we had to do it really quickly. And to do that, we kind of put on hold our longer term digital strategies, and digital strategies such as new business services that we were going to roll out that were based on maybe new new markets, for example, that we could reach now through the cloud that we weren't able to reach before. Using AI to control various production or distribution channels. Well, if you're not using those, then suddenly those become a lower priority. However, something like telehealth, for example, if you're in a hospital and you started initiating telemedicine, that accelerates. Now, the question is, did the strategy accelerate, or did they kind of just put the strategy on hold for a bit and just accelerate the bits that they needed just to get through the pandemic? And are now circling back and saying, well, okay, we didn't mean to do it in the sequence, but we've done these pieces now. Now we have to go back and is the original vision, is the original strategy still valid? And if so, the pieces that we built, are they still a valid part of that, or do they change the overall big picture of what we want to achieve? I think that's kind of what I was getting at. Now, a lot of people confuse the idea of teleconferencing capabilities with a digital transformation.
Exactly.
The transformation happened as a result. Well, no, it's difficult to say. The transformation almost happened independently of the fact that video conferencing was available. We didn't have a choice, right? And so we had to transform. The technology came about, and so that enabled new working patterns. But to be perfectly honest, I don't think we ever anticipated the change in culture and the change in our working procedures that remote working brought about. And I think, John, you were talking about these reduced feedback loops and the ability to get people in the same room quicker. I mean, we didn't actively go out and plan to do that when we had our remote workers, but that somehow happened. So it wasn't strategic at all. However, now we can say, well, our average time to get a new product to market has shrunk from 3 months to 2 months. Right, that now becomes a strategic input into our strategic planning process. Right, so.
Yeah. David, to add on what you're saying, I always, maybe it's the cynical part of me here, but I always think of transformation as if you've already been disrupted, or if you just haven't been evolving and keeping up with maybe where you should have been, then you need to do some type of a burst capacity effort to deal with either a reactive response to disruption or just to catch up to maybe where you should have been. I think that's really interesting to think about in the context of, and I know we still have potentially another dip coming with the pandemic and everything that we're dealing with, but as we emerge, how have organizations looked at it from that standpoint? Are there things that were really critical path, or things that they really needed to do to survive, or that they needed to do just to maintain their viability as an organization? And what does that mean coming out, or what direction maybe do we give those organizations? I know some of that belongs in the digital and IT strategy content, but those responses to disruption, or if you have had to put those things on hold, do you have any thoughts on what you would recommend organizations do to evaluate that or take some steps forward coming out of things?
I don't know that it's an easy sort of 1, 2, 3 step thing.
Sure.
I think first of all is the digital strategy is not a technology discussion; it's a business discussion. And so the point is, where is your business headed, and how is it using technology to get there? That's the one thing. So I think the overall assessment of your position within the within your environment is very important. Who are your competitors? What are they doing? What technologies are they using? What markets are they selling to? What products are they delivering? What is the level of customer satisfaction with those products? All the stuff you would do with strategy in general is valid right now. because that will tell you whether you have been disrupted or whether you are about to become disruptive. And those are two different strategic directions. If you are becoming disruptive, you are an aggressor in the market, you are out to win market share, and there are certain strategies you have to follow. If you are catching up because you have been disrupted, then you're learning from the leader, right? And you have to figure out what that leader is doing and whether you can salvage your position in the industry, whether you can depend on customer loyalty, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's, I would say, to a large degree, most of us have components of our organization that disrupt, but larger components of the organization that has been disrupted. In other words, where we have to catch up. So we've got to learn from others in the industry. So the question is, one, are you learning from others and applying that into your own organization, or are you trying to be disruptive, in which case you are the innovator, you are the one who has to change the way in which the market thinks. It's a much more aggressive kind of strategy. And I think having that mindset is the important thing to start with, to understand that this is not a technology thing, that it is actually a business discussion that you're having, and that it should be had within the people who lead the business units. That's my starting point. And I don't know if there are some tangible next steps after that, beyond just going through what you normally would in any strategic discussion. I'll open that for discussion.
I'm going to say, I thought it was interesting how the pandemic didn't land evenly. Like John said, you know, like our company was interrupted, you know, basically a week, right? Or maybe a month. We happened to be more coincidence than planning or forethought, but we happened to be ready and able to pivot and send people home in droves, 400 or 500 all like within 4 or 5 days. But some companies, like if you look at grocery shopping or retail or the restaurants and stuff, they got crushed and had to completely pivot. Uber, their ride-hailing service just dropped through the floor. And then I think they bought Postmates or were looking at doing a partnership with them, and they expanded their food delivery, right? So they pivoted and they saw an opportunity and they're like, hey, we're going to change, you know, and then restaurants had to pivot too. Instead of dining in, they had to do more takeout. And so those that had big, maybe were planning on food delivery or back office type tasks where they could take online orders and stuff, or had a good tech stack or good partnership, were well positioned to take advantage of the pandemic. They obviously didn't know it was coming, but they could take advantage of it. And those other companies that couldn't were disrupted or went out of business. They went bust. I just thought that was kind of interesting to see unfold, right, in the news, the business news. If you're keeping up on it, you can see these changes and trends and things. And so I think with kind of back to that telehealth example, I think the secondary companies that maybe they didn't, they weren't well positioned, but they saw an opportunity within the new paradigm shift and they could take advantage of it. They were well positioned as well. So, you know, the telehealth is a narrow example, but like you were saying, David, you're either being disrupted or you're disrupting. But I think there was like a third leg where you're like, oh, hey, we see an opportunity and we can take advantage of this. So we're going to pivot in some way, maybe just to survive, but maybe they could accelerate whatever they were doing. So.
Yeah, you raise restaurants. It's an interesting. I always just point down to my local restaurants down the road. I live in a city block, and there's a few restaurants around me, and a couple of them closed their doors the first week of the pandemic, and they said we're going to wait and see what happens. Well, they never reopened. Those that stayed open, even though they were hurting, and started trying different things, and some of them worked and some of them didn't. But the interesting one to me was the local Middle Eastern restaurant just down the road here. And the owner of that said, well, you know what, people aren't coming here to eat, but they always used to come outside and smoke those hookah pipes. I have to be very careful to say that because with my accent, that can come off a little bit bad. But you know, I had a lot of people coming down smoking the hookah pipes. And so what he did was he would see them walking their dogs and say, hey, you guys still want to smoke? And they would say, yeah, we'd love to. So, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a pipe, you keep it, but whatever you need, whatever they put in that stuff and the charcoal burners and stuff, you come out, I've got them all here. And he became the local distributor for the community. That's how he stayed in business. And then it started curbside takeout and that kind of stuff. And people started going back and buying. And I tell you what, the first restaurant that really had crowds in it was Henry's Place. And it was because of how he stayed alive and continued to support the people that were his customers, just in a different way. And I think that was an interesting case for me. And I can apply it across all of them, across all manner of industries. So another one, for example, we talk about banking, right? And one of the big issues in banking is, you still need to do banking. And we were trying to get our business started and we had to go to the local bank and open an account. Well, we couldn't because we couldn't get all the people into the branch. And, even if they did allow us to do it virtually, we still had to identify ourselves, and the compliance regulations within that particular bank didn't allow for remote identification. So what started happening is banks started finding alternative ways to verify people's identities. And those banks who did that first started becoming, turning a compliance regulation into a competitive advantage. Because now you could go and open accounts and do business remotely. And even those things that used to require you to go down to the branch, you could now do online. And, so we found people in the situation, organizations in the situation, not only finding ways to stay current with their peers, but also finding ways of getting ahead of them. So, yeah. Okay, Joni had to drop.
Yep, she did. Yeah, so real quick, I just want to take over screen sharing back real quick and do a couple of quick announcements, David. One announcement that I'm excited about that been working with John here on is I'll be speaking next week, Friday, at the Treasure Valley Agile meetup and be talking about high velocity IT and its implications on framework alignment and culture change. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity to do that. That'll be a lot of fun. Let me go ahead and just go back to my presentation, if this will allow me, and just wrap that up. And there's a whole lot of training classes coming up for the second half of the year. And I wanted to get a chance just to show this. And I have all this on my website too, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I am wanting to highlight a couple of things. I'm going to be teaching both an ITIL 4 Foundation public class, August 24th through 27th, and then Drive Stakeholder Value, which is the customer journey mapping and customer user employee experience related class, relationship maturity between service provider, service consumer. Starting October 19th, there's a lot of other classes that are pretty much all the way across different frameworks and different parts of the catalog between Agile and value stream mapping and DevOps, and taking a look at even some things like SRE and some experience pieces. Another one, big one to highlight, if anybody out there who is listening has their V3 expert or has their 17 credits, one of the final managing professional transition classes is happening November 15th. So I wanted to make sure I put that out there. And then I always try and talk about announcements. I'm working on finalizing my speaker for next month. I haven't been able to completely pin her down on a date, but it will be an experience-related presentation around customer success management experience, and I'm looking forward to doing that next month. We have that slated for September 14th, and as soon as that gets finalized, I will announce that. I have the link here to my YouTube page where we have all of our previous recordings and where this one will show up once I get it uploaded. I mentioned the Treasure Valley Agile community, which the monthly meetings and the meetup link is there. Especially, like I said, I'll be looking forward to presenting at the one a week from Friday. Project Management Institute Western Idaho chapter link is here. And then our friend Greg Sanker has a blog and YouTube channel called Keep the Learning On that I like to promote. They're taking a break from their recordings right now, but I suspect those will be starting back up soon. But I think they have around 40 episodes that they've recorded out there with a lot of great discussion and content. So I'll post this deck and I'll get David's slides incorporated as well and get that posted out as part of our follow-up to the meeting. So again, just want to thank everyone for being here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we can have any final closure or any final discussion that we want to have. And thanks again, everyone, for being here. And thank you, David, for presenting. I greatly appreciate that presentation is full of great content and a lot of deep thinking that we can all take advantage of and try and do more of. So I greatly appreciate that.
Welcome. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, David, a lot of great insights. I tell you what, I'm leaving with some extra gas in the tank. I'm pretty excited. I love the abstraction and kind of thinking of that, front office versus back office and that interplay there, especially as when you put your future cast goggles on. I think that's really interesting, and I'm really excited to kind of bring that in. I really also like the nod to the methodology changes, right, and pulling from the bag of tricks. That's certainly a trend that we've seen here at Blue Cross of Idaho, and certainly around the industry. And then thinking about portfolio management in that new way I love all the arrows in the cycle. I mean, those are my domains, agile and portfolio management. But a lot of great content, a lot of great insights. Really appreciate you.
Thanks, John. Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah, that portfolio diagram is one of my absolute favorites too, John. I'm glad. In fact, Dave and I talked about making sure that one stayed on there and that we emphasized that one.